Hi, everybody. Before we get to another great interview, the Two Opinionated podcast could really use your help. And it's easy, it's free. IMDb, which is the entertainment database, imdb.com, named us a top 100 podcast. We came in at number 82. That's a big deal because there's 15 million podcasts and growing. So to be named to anybody's top 100 list, pretty big deal for us. And the way you can help is to go to imdb.com, look up the Two Opinionated podcast, and that's it. Just bringing our page up. That traffic really helps us out. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. All we ask is that you subscribe. It's also free, but that really helps us to attract these amazing guests that we keep bringing on the program. And that's it. Two easy ways for you to support us, and we would really appreciate the help. Now let's get to that interview. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Two Opinionated. I'm so excited today. I've got journalist, author Nick Bryant with me. So welcome, Nick.
Glad to be with you, Michael.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you, sir. And I know we got a lot to cover, but let's start this way. Tell me a little bit about your background. You know what it is you do, and kind of what where your interests lie, and that'll kind of get us started.
I didn't study journalism in college. I studied philosophy.
Oh, okay.
Which made me very confused, but nonetheless, it opened my mind. I worked for a university for 5 years, and my job was to write papers about science and medicine and ethical quandaries involved with them. Some people would call that a biomedical ethicist. And then I started moonlighting as a journalist at night.
And what caused you to do that? Was that just something to do, or was it you needing some extra income? What got you into that?
I just like writing.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was a young writer, and young writers are pretty voracious. And
that's right.
I loved writing. So I wrote all these academic papers, and I wrote a book, and it did absolutely nothing. I mean, it didn't dent the problem at all. But then I wrote an article. There was a woman who was a little crazy in Minneapolis. She ran she ran a program for prostitutes that took prostitutes off the street.
Yeah.
And she said that there was a serial killer killing prostitutes in Minneapolis, but she was kind of crazy. So no one really listened to her. But then I decided to look into it. And lo and behold, I did come to the conclusion that there was a serial killer killing prostitutes in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I got a list. I think there's like 43 that have been stabbed, strangled, or beaten to death, prostitutes in the previous 8 years. And then I went to the Minneapolis Police Department and I showed them the list. And I went to the St. Paul Police Department. I showed them the list and I said, "You guys really want to say that there's no serial killer?" And ultimately, what happened because of that article is a task force was formed to try to catch this guy. I think there was anywhere from 1 to 3 of them. And I thought to myself, I've been writing these academic papers and a book for 5 years now, and nothing has gotten accomplished. And then I write this article, and then a task force is formed. So in 1995, I left the University of Minnesota and I moved to New York City and started my freelance writing career.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Yeah, you just kind of fell into that, really. I mean, you decided to do it, but then you just that story kind of dropped in your lap a little bit, and it turned out it was something.
Actually, there was a lot of research involved in it, but it was an interesting experience. It was kind of funny. When I put the list together one night in my apartment, I was thinking to myself, there's a serial killer that I'm about to out. And
Yeah.
I thought to
That's
myself,
scary.
I hope he doesn't take this personally.
Well, did they ever catch him?
No, no, they never did.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah, I'm assuming that that has stopped, or is that stuff still going on?
Well, I mean, the FBI used to say that there was 50 serial killers at work in the country, and that was heavily underestimated.
Yeah.
And I've seen anywhere from 200 to 500. So, and I think a lot of them are very peripatetic and they're traveling quite a bit. They jump from state to state.
Yeah. Yeah, which makes it tough to catch them because it's hard to
Yeah,
correlate the crimes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so scary though. Yeah, I guess I would probably be working on that story and not worry about it until I got ready to publish it. And then I was like, oh yeah.
Well, that's what happened to me.
Be
After
like,
I assembled
maybe I should worry just a little bit.
it. But then I started to publish things about very dangerous subjects, and that just seems to be my niche, and as a journalist and a writer.
Well, you've kind of championed the cause for the young people that are abused or that are coming from poor backgrounds or poor education, and you've kind of been a advocate for that. How did you kind of get into that realm of kind of work?
Well, I'd written a number of things on lower socioeconomic children.
Yeah,
I'm very sensitive to that issue, and actually, America really doesn't put its money where its mouth is regarding our
agreed.
children. And about 21 or 22% of American children are living below the poverty threshold. They're in families that are living below the poverty threshold, and families with children are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population.
Yeah,
And 2 or 3 million American children aren't even insured, and millions of them experience hunger at least once a month. So our country as I said, puts a lot of lip service into the protection and care of our children,
yes,
but it doesn't. And I kind of look at that as a kind of wholesale destruction of children. And then I started writing about child trafficking, which I think is kind of a retail destruction of children. And I started writing about researching and writing about child trafficking in 2002.
oh, you've been at this for a little while then.
22, 23 years. Yeah.
Well, I know you had written the book, The Franklin Scandal.
Yes.
So tell me about that a little bit. What was the Franklin Scandal?
The full title of the book is The Franklin Scandal: A Story of Power Brokers, Child Abuse, and Betrayal. And it's about a nationwide pedophile network that pandered children to the rich and powerful. It had connections to intelligence. It deployed blackmail, hidden cameras. In a lot of ways, Epstein is a carbon
I was
copy.
going to say that sounds very familiar.
Yeah. And I spent 7 years. I started working on that book in 2002, and I spent 7 years on it. It was published 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
And I was exhausted. I put up all my money on. I kind of got obsessed with the story, and I traveled thousands of miles and spent a lot of money. And I live in the epicenter of publishing, which is New York City, and I couldn't get anyone to really take a good look at it.
Yeah.
Editors and publishers were afraid of the story because what I was saying in that story with the Franklin scandal is that, the government is covering up child trafficking in the very least, which is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And people were really reluctant. I was represented by a pretty big literary agency, and I gave them the book proposal and they dropped me. And then I was represented by a very good agent, and he tried to sell it and he couldn't sell it. So, and then a small press on the West Coast ultimately agreed to publish the book, but it was pretty laborious.
Well, I was going to say, was that just fear? Was that just fear of reprisal? That's why they didn't want to. publish it?
Yeah, I think job security, editors in New York City of magazines or books, they do very well financially.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of them wanted to jeopardize that. And I think that they saw that this story might jeopardize that. Because I remember I was pitching it to editors, and I could almost, at a certain point, I could almost see the wheels going around.
Yeah.
They would say to themselves, this is a horrible story. I need to help Nick Bryant. Or I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy, and then I can have a nice meal with my family tonight.
Right. Right.
And all of them went to door two.
Yeah, that's really disappointing. Because you think of journalists, especially, as having kind of an integrity to tell the truth. So whatever the story is, that's what you tell. But that's not really the case anymore.
Well, I found that out. And what's really troubled me was I had a lot of friends in publishing. Yeah. At that point, I lived in New York for 7 or 8 years. And I had a pretty good freelance writing career going. And I also had friends that had done very well in the media, like one of my buddies from Minneapolis who I'd known for decades. He had his own column in the New York Times.
Yeah.
And I thought most of people would be spineless about this story. I really underestimated because everybody was spineless. Yeah. And I had one person apologize to me, and
for not publishing it.
Yeah, for not trying to help me. And but I haven't really seen too many of the rest. I was pretty disgusted by their spinelessness.
Yeah, I would be too. That's terrible. That's terrible. Well, so you put this book out, and now we're dealing with kind of this Jeffrey Epstein situation. Now, what similarities do you see with this situation and what you're writing about with the Franklin scandal?
I mean, the similarities are pretty amazing. Yeah. You've got 2 pedophilic pimps in both networks, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and then with the Franklin scandal, you had Lawrence King and Craig Spence. And Spence was a CIA asset for sure. And just as Epstein was an intelligence asset, and maybe Maxwell was, the kids would be flown all around the country and they would be pandered to very powerful individuals. And Spence's home in DC, he had like a mansion in DC, and it was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And a lot of the parties went down at Spence's home. And if you did anything illegal there, then you were compromised, just as Jeffrey Epstein, all of Jeffrey Epstein's homes were fitted with audiovisual blackmail equipment. So the same thing. And then the unbelievable amount of federal firepower that was used to cover both the networks up is pretty astounding.
Well, talk about that a little bit, because, just as, lay people or normal citizens, it doesn't really make sense. Why is there such a cover up? Why doesn't law enforcement just release whatever they have on that, or go after the people that are on there?
With the Franklin scandal, actually, that network, I think, was much bigger than Jeffrey Epstein's network.
Really?
But it was around 10 to 12 years, whereas Jeffrey Epstein trafficked children for, I believe, about 25 years.
Yeah.
So I think that both networks destroyed the same amount of children. And there were grand juries that were used to cover up both Epstein and the Franklin network. I don't know if your audience is familiar with how grand juries work. The term grand jury sounds like the gods of jurisprudence have spoken.
Right.
But grand juries are very susceptible to being corrupted. A special prosecutor is chosen to oversee a grand jury. It's not adversarial. And grand jurors are just citizens that have shown up for jury duty and been funneled to a grand jury. And the special prosecutor of the grand jury presents the evidence that he wants the grand jurors to see and calls the witnesses that he wants the grand jurors to hear from. And they can pretty much twist the minds of grand jurors in any direction they want. There was a Supreme Court, New York Supreme Court justice that said special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And that was the case with both the Franklin Network and the Epstein Network. There was 2 grand juries in Nebraska, a state and federal grand jury, and both declared that not a single child had been abused. And then there was a grand jury.
Yeah, I mean, how is that possible? How does that? I don't understand.
Well, that's because that special prosecutor has walking orders to make sure that no one is indicted, and to cover it up. And that was the Epstein grand jury too in Florida said that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't abused a single child. And I've got the transcripts of one of the Franklin grand juries that show how corrupt it was. And then I've also got the transcripts of the Epstein grand jury that shows how corrupt it was. What happened with Epstein is he had homes all over, but he spent a lot of time in his Palm Beach home. And there was a 14-year-old girl who went to her stepmother and said, I was molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And the stepmother took the girl to the Palm Beach Police Department, and the girl described the interior of Epstein's home and also his anatomy. And the Palm Beach Police Department felt like she was telling the truth, and they started an investigation. And by the time they were, the investigation lasted about a year. By the time they were done with the investigation, they were aware of 23 victims. But on paper, they had 5 victims' statements, and then they had 17 people that corroborated the victims. And they were going to arrest Jeffrey Epstein on 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor and 1 count of lewd and lascivious molestation, which potentially could put someone away for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
And that case, I mean, they had the arrest warrant. They were going to go arrest Jeffrey Epstein. And that case was taken away from them by the state of Florida. And then the state of Florida convened a grand jury or impaneled a grand jury. And although authorities were aware of 23 victims, only 2 victims were called. And one had been molested when she was 14 by Epstein. She was now 16. And then the other one had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein multiple times when she was 16, and now she was 8. And that special prosecutor just skewered those 2 girls. I mean, all they called was the 2 girls and skewered them. They were calling them prostitutes. I mean, the kid's 16 years old, and she was molested by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14. So that was a very corrupt grand jury.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, it's horrible, appalling. And that grand jury concluded that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't molested a single child. And that really upset Michael Ryder, who was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department.
Yeah.
And he is the stand-up guy in all of this. Without him, we wouldn't even know the name Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
He called that grand jury, I think it was the greatest miscarriage of justice in modern times. And he went to the Department of Justice and he said, you have to investigate this. Jeffrey Epstein molested all these girls, and you have to investigate this. And the Department of Justice, the Southern District of Florida, acted like it was going to impanel a grand jury, but then all of a sudden there was just radio silence. And what was going on was Epstein had a dream team of attorneys, Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr,
Right.
Roy Black.
The usual suspects.
Yes. And they started negotiating with the feds. And I've got the emails, or some of the emails, between Epstein's attorney and the assistant U.S. attorney, Anne-Marie Villafana. And the deal that they cooked up was so dirty that one of the emails says, we have to go to this one magistrate to sign off on this. Basically, what she's saying is nobody else is going to sign off on this, but
Right.
this one magistrate. So there's the Victim Crimes Rights Act. And according to that, victims of crimes are apprised of the adjudication of their perpetrators. And actually, they're allowed to confront their perpetrators. And in this case, the feds made a down and dirty deal and sealed it. They wanted no one to know the deal that they made. And none of Jeffrey Epstein's victims were apprised. And at that point, there were 34. The feds had a list of 34 Epstein victims. I've got the list, but they knew of 40. So the feds knew of 40 underage Epstein victims.
Well, so why were they, who were they protecting? Why were they covering that up?
I'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
So
Okay.
with what was going on is there were actually lawyers that were representing victims at this point that were launching civil suits against Epstein. And then there was the Palm Beach Post, and the government sealed it and they appealed the sealing of it. And then the judge in Palm Beach, his name was Kenneth Murray, he said, unseal it. And the government didn't want that unsealed. So they appealed the sealing. And then ultimately the 11th Appellate Circuit, Federal Appellate Circuit, said unseal it. And what we saw was a document that was unbelievable. That document gave blanket immunity to all of Epstein's co-conspirators, all of them. And
I mean, that's probably a pretty big list.
Well, it named 4 or 5 of them, but it said all of them.
Yeah.
And even though the Department of Justice has now said that that there isn't any co-conspirators. Anyway, so what happened after that was the attorneys got to see this horrid document.
Yeah.
And Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney that oversaw that entire process. And he became Trump's labor secretary the first time, in the first Trump administration. And the Trump administration was vetting him, and they asked him, why did you go so light on Epstein? And he said, I was told that Jeffrey Epstein was intelligence, and it was above my pay grade, and I had to stand down. And in our government, there's only 2 people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general, and one is the president. And this was in 2007. So the attorney general was Alberto Gonzales, and the president was George Walker Bush II.
Yep.
So, and there's no way an attorney general is going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network without his boss, the president, saying, cover it up. He's not going to go out on a limb like that. So that cover up emanated from the loftiest regions of the apex of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
And the feds had the state, because the Crime Victims' Rights Act, they wanted no part of it because they had violated it. So they wanted the state to punish Epstein, and the state gave Epstein, and at this point they tacked on 1 count of unlawful sexual activity with a minor. So, and then the grand jury had said that he was indicted on 1 count of pandering. So Epstein was looking at 20 years. The adult pandering is 5, and unlawful sexual activity with a minor was 15. So Jeffrey Epstein was looking at 20 years, and then the feds worked this deal out with the state where Jeffrey Epstein was sentenced to 18 months in a county jail, and he had to do 13 months. And he was going out during the day. He had to report at night, but he was going out during the day and molesting underage girls.
Still,
yeah. And then he continued, and this was in 2007, 2008. So he continued to traffic underage girls for another 11 years or so.
Well, and walk through that a little bit. What finally kind of brought him down?
What brought him down and what brought the Franklin pimps down, and also I believe P. Diddy too, is there was a lot of civil suit litigation being launched at them.
Yeah.
And the media was getting pretty intense. The media was getting pretty intense with Craig Spence, the Franklin pimp that had the mansion in DC, who was an intelligence asset. The media was getting really intense with Jeffrey Epstein because of the civil suits. And then the Miami Herald did a series on him. And the same thing with Diddy. Diddy had 5 lawsuits, civil lawsuits launched at him. And those lawsuits, 2 of those girls were minors when they had been molested by Diddy. And little Rod, who launched the 5th lawsuit, he was a hip hop producer. He said that Diddy was constantly trafficking underage girls and that his houses were wired for audiovisual blackmail. So in all 3 cases, I think you have blackmailers that were no longer effective as blackmailers because
the attention brought on to them.
Because there was just too much focus in the media. So Epstein was arrested in 2019 at Teterboro Airport. And the next day, the FBI sought his safe open. Now, when we think of safes, we think of some kind of, but his safe was the size of a closet.
Oh.
And the FBI took out a number of hundreds, if not thousands, of compact discs and that had child abuse material on them. And then Business Insider reported that there were 2 hard drives taken out. And this very strange document by the Justice Department FBI that came out last week that no one signed. I mean,
right.
It exonerated all these perpetrators, but no one signed it. There was a couple of things I agreed with. I believe that there were more than 300 gigabytes of child abuse material on those discs and also on those hard drives. And I agree that there were more than 1,000 victims. But I strongly disagree with that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't pandering those girls to anyone. And I strongly disagree that blackmail was involved. And to say that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't pandering those girls to his cronies is really disingenuous. I mean, it's a lie that
it's obviously a lie. I don't think any of us actually believes that that's not true. He was doing that.
But here's the thing with that. The best thing you can say to a victim of sexual assault or child sexual abuse is, I believe you. The worst thing that you can say is, I don't believe you. And that's what the government is saying to scores and scores of these girls who were pandered to Jeffrey Epstein's powerful cronies is, I don't believe you. That's how far our government has descended in the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Well, and why is that? Is that because there's people in the government that are, have been involved with him and they're afraid of being exposed? Is that the main driver?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 variables. I think that there's people that were involved with Epstein that are very powerful in the financial realm and also probably in the political realm. When people are very powerful financially, they can buy a lot of politicians.
Yeah.
But I also think that we're dealing with a political system that's rife with blackmail. And I think that the political system is also being protected. And there's a U.S. sitting congressman from Tennessee. His name's Tim Burchett. And about a year and a half ago, he came out and said, a bunch of my colleagues are being compromised in honey traps. And that's an age-old problem, is political blackmail.
Right.
we've had political blackmail in the United States since the beginning of our republic. And I'll give you an example. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old woman who was married, and her husband was blackmailing Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
And this muckraking journalist came along and he outed Alexander Hamilton having an affair with this woman. And the muckraking journalist, well, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton had a lot of antipathy towards each other. They did not like each other.
Sure.
So the muckraking journalist that outed Hamilton felt like Jefferson owed him an appointment in his administration. And Jefferson didn't give an appointment, so he outed Jefferson as having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And DNA has shown that for sure.
Right.
So that is even our founding fathers were subjected to political sexual blackmail.
Yeah, that's so interesting and a little disappointing. You know.
When you write about the things that I write about, you get disappointed quite a bit.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. So we had that kind of weird situation where, our attorney general is saying that the file's on her desk and she's going to release that file, and then all of a sudden there's no file. What do you think happened there?
Well, okay, so on February 26th, she said, the Epstein files are on my desk and I'm going to release them.
Yep.
And then she released them and they were a nothing sandwich. And I acquired Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book in 2012. And
how'd you do that?
It was his house manager tried to sell it to one of the attorneys that were launching civil suits at Epstein. And the attorney called the FBI.
Yeah.
And the FBI did a sting and impounded the Black Book. And it was ultimately given to some attorneys that represented the victims. And then I got it through one of the attorneys.
Yeah.
And I came back to New York City with the Black Book, and no one would touch it. No one would touch it. I tried to sell it for I tried to sell the Black Book and articles on the Black Book for like 3 years, and no one would touch it. Then finally, I got Gawker to publish it. And at that point, I had flight logs too. So yeah. I was the first guy to release the Black Book and the flight logs. And Pam Bondi, which she released in 2025, a couple months ago, I released more incriminating information on Epstein than she did in 2025.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. She had the Black Book, and when we published the Black Book, if people were adults and not victims, we redacted their phone number. We kept their last name there, but we redacted their phone number. And there's also over 100 victims that are listed in the book, and we redacted their last names, and also we redacted their numbers.
Okay.
Now, the Black Book that Pam Bondi gave us, everybody was redacted. So, I mean,
and why would you do that? What reason would you have for doing that other than to protect somebody?
Yeah, it's very strange that she did that. I mean, I believe that the Trump administration underestimated the knowledge that people had surrounding Epstein.
Yeah.
I think that they thought that they could throw us a bone and that would be it. But there were no new revelations. I mean, like I said, I published the Black Book and flight logs 10 years earlier.
Right.
So then Pam Bondi, our attorney general, says that after there's no new revelation, she says that she's been bamboozled by the FBI's New York field office, that they've lied to her. And then she says that there's a truckload of evidence, quote unquote, and she'll be presenting that, but only but matters of national security will be redacted from the documents. So now she has to tell us, why do a bunch of child molesters have anything to do with national security?
Well, that was my next question. Yeah, why would you need to protect that list? Because what do they have to do with national security, and why do they have that access to national security?
So, and then, as I said earlier, the FBI drilled Epstein's safe open the day after he was arrested, and those guys probably worked around the clock looking at everything in his safe.
Well, you know, they didn't just let it sit there.
And Pam Bondi and the Trump administration are acting like they were the first ones to look at the stuff, that it hadn't been looked at before. So that's really a blatant lie by Pam Bondi and the Trump administration.
Well, so is she doing that because Donald Trump's on that list? Is that who she's protecting?
It's entirely possible. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were very good friends.
Yeah.
And people are mad at Pam Bondi, but Pam Bondi isn't going to say this stuff unless Trump, I mean, I'm surmising that Pam Bondi isn't going to say that there's a truckload of evidence, national security, that we're going to release it unless Trump gave her the thumbs up. I can't imagine her doing this thing or doing that preemptively, unilaterally and preemptively. I just can't imagine.
It doesn't seem plausible.
No.
Well, so where do we go from here? Because I think most of us believe that the reason that we're not seeing the evidence or the list is because Donald Trump and others that are high up in the government are on that list, and there's stuff on there that they don't want to get out. So where do we go from here? Do we just move on, or is there something else we can do to possibly get that released at some point?
I started an organization, a 501c nonprofit organization called Epstein Justice.
Yeah.
And our goal is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate this, a Congressional Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate Epstein et al. And in order for us to do that, we have to have a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. And some people think, well, that's going to be impossible. You're not going to be able to do that. And I believe that we can. There was a House bill that was 3633 that was just introduced, I think, yesterday.
Yeah.
And what it said was the House Rules, it was released in the House Rules Committee, and it would require the House Rules Committee to make Pam Bondi preserve and release any records related to Jeffrey Epstein. So I think that was introduced yesterday, and it was voted down 7-5.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that this morning, that it got voted down. So then what happens?
So Michelle Fishback from Minnesota, she voted it down. Yeah. Aaron Hoken from Indiana, she voted it down. Nick Langworthy from New York voted it down. Austin Scott from Georgia voted it down. Morgan Griffith from Pennsylvania voted it down. Brian Jack from Georgia voted it down. And the chairperson, Virginia Fox, voted it down. And we're at Epstein Justice, we're putting up their numbers so people can call them.
Oh, good. And yeah.
We're going to put heat on the government. Now, why are Fishback, Hodgson, Langworthy, Scott, Griffin, Jack, and Fox, why are they protecting child molesters? So
yeah, that's a pretty good question.
We can focus on these individuals now that we know are these 7 individuals, these 7 representatives are part of the cover-up. And we can focus on them, and we can shame them into doing the right thing if enough people contact them, we can shame them into doing the right thing.
I mean, ultimately, it always seems to come down to whether or not they can stay in office. So if they're worried that they're going to get kicked out of office because they're getting pressure to release this stuff, then I could see them changing their mind. Otherwise, I don't think they do anything.
Well, we're gonna have to pressure them.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the bottom line is, and Epstein Justice, unfortunately, this malfeasance by the Trump administration has been a boon to Epstein Justice, where people are joining us. We have webinars every month.
Yeah.
And we equip people with the tools on how to pressure their representatives and senators into doing the right thing. And it's up to the American people, really, right now. Do we want our government? If you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So
right.
Our government right now is aiding and abetting child molestation, child trafficking. Do we want a government that aids and abets child trafficking? I mean, that's what we have to ask ourselves. Would we trust anybody who's aiding and abetting child trafficking? Never.
Well, that's right. That's right. But the difficulty seems to be convincing people that this stuff is actually true, because we've got certain parts of the government that they come out and they say, why are we wasting time on this? The guy's not around anymore. It's not true. But
do you think you would be interviewing? Do you think you would be interviewing me right now if what hadn't transpired in the last couple of weeks? I doubt it.
No, that's probably true.
You're I think my fifth or sixth interview today.
Yeah.
So, and I've got one more left, and those 5 or 6 people wouldn't be interviewing me unless this was going down. People know, Americans know. I mean, Americans know that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking children to very powerful individuals. I don't think they know that their political system is rife with blackmail, that a political system is also being protected.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
I've written 3 books on that have to do with sexual political blackmail.
Yeah.
And it's very much a reality. And as I said earlier, with Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, it goes back a long time. I'll give you a couple of examples of sexual political blackmail. The Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2006 was Dennis Hastert. Now, he had been molesting little boys going back 30 years. And there was a FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds who said that the FBI knew what he was up to when he was Speaker of the House. But nothing happened to him. And eventually someone was blackmailing him. One of his victims was blackmailing him after he left the House. And the FBI decided to come down on him, Hastert, instead of the blackmailer, which is kind of strange. I don't know exactly why that happened. Why I think Hastert might have thought he was making millions as a lobbyist, and I think that he might have stepped on some toes that he thought he could. I'll give you another example. Larry Craig. He was a very conservative family values guy from Idaho.
Okay.
And he was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, first as a representative and then as a senator. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And the guy who I wrote it with ran this huge gay escort service, and he was providing escorts to Craig in the 80s. And late 80s, early 90s.
Long time ago.
And there was a documentary that was made called Outrage, where it looked at closeted politicians and how they vote against gay rights. And there were other escorts that had come forward, or gay prostitutes that had come forward and said that Henry had nothing to do with it, that said that they had also had liaisons with Craig. And Craig was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, having relations or liaisons with all kinds of gay escorts. And then he was in a Minneapolis airport bathroom, and a bathroom at the Minneapolis International Airport. And there was a guy slapping his foot in the stall next to his. And that's kind of it's a gay signal for I'm hot to trot. Let's go for it.
Right.
And he bid on it. I mean, he got arrested for solicitation of sex in a bathroom. And so this guy, he's getting escorts from all over. He's trying to pick people, and he's a U.S. senator. He's trying to pick guys up in bathrooms. How hard would it be to blackmail that guy?
Doesn't sound like it'd be very difficult.
No, I mean, a kid doing an after-school project with a smartphone could compromise him. And it's funny, I'm from Minneapolis, and I've been to that airport many, many times. I fly back to Minneapolis at least once a year to see my friends and family. And I was sitting on a commode in a bathroom, and some guy was slapping his foot against the ground in the stall next to mine. And I was thinking that the guy had a neurological disorder, that he was having some kind of neurological disorder. And I'm really glad I didn't say, can I help you? I was thinking maybe I should help him or something.
Yeah, I would never have known. I probably would have said something.
And then you would have gotten busted.
That's right.
But these are two examples. There's nothing that makes people stupid like lust, arrogance, and greed. Those are three things that make very smart people very, very stupid.
Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself?
People ask me that all the time, and because I'm an Epstein expert, and I mean, there are so many anomalies that night that it would be easy to say that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, but but it's kind of like a dog chasing its tail.
Yeah.
We don't really, I mean, people could argue that he did, and people could argue that he didn't. And I try not to focus on that. I try to focus on justice for his victims. I don't want to get bogged down on whether or not he killed himself. Now, that footage that was released that ostensibly showed that Jeffrey Epstein was by himself. I mean, I didn't see a cell there. And there was also a minute chopped out of it. I mean,
that was the thing they released it saying, see, he's just sitting there, but then it's missing time.
but I mean, where's the cell? I mean, I don't see the cell.
I didn't see it either.
And the Bureau of Prisons took a lot of heat in 2019 when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. If they thought they had a reasonable copy of footage that would show that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, they would have rolled it out in 2019.
I think so too. Yeah.
So that's another lie. I mean, liars have to keep lying. That's the problem with liars.
Yeah.
And with the Trump administration, at this point, they're just lying and lying and lying about Jeffrey Epstein and his network of child molesters.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems that way, that there's this a big cover up. What involvement does the Democratic side of the aisle have with that? Is there a reason that we're not hearing more from that side as far as outrage over releasing this list?
I believe that both parties are compromised equally. If you can be compromised, you're compromised. I mean, that's just the way it is, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You have to really mind your P's and Q's when you get to Washington, D.C. But with the Franklin scandal, I got to one of the blackmail photographers.
Oh, and yeah.
I was trying to get my mind around everything. You don't read about this stuff in books. So I was just trying to get my mind around like a nationwide pedophile network and blackmail. And And I said, well, how does this work? I mean, I wanted him to kind of distill it for me.
Yeah.
And he said, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a beautiful yacht and it's a beautiful day and you can have anything you want on that yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So that's what it's like being compromised. And with Dennis Hastert, we saw his meteoric ascent because he was compromised. And I've seen that with other politicians, that they've had meteoric ascents because they were compromised. And no one's going to come out and say I'm compromised because I molested a child. I mean,
well, that's right. That's right.
No one's going to say that.
So they're benefiting from their silence up until, theoretically they would stop being silent.
And they're generally allowed to vote with their constituency.
Yeah.
But when things are close, markers are called in and they have to vote the way that they're told to vote.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm assuming that happens on both sides.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. It's our political system, regardless if it's Republican or Democrat, is rife with.
Well, we keep hearing that there's a lot of Hollywood that might be on this list. Hollywood and Donald Trump, for the most part, have kind of clashed. I would assume that the Trump administration would want to release that list if it was a lot of people that have been against them in the past, but we don't have that.
I think we're never going to get it. Well, at least at this point, we're not going to get an honest answer about Diddy either. But I think that Diddy was responsible for compromising a lot of people in Hollywood.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. And of course, to me, it seemed like he's getting off basically with just a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. What's interesting, Damian Williams was the U.S. attorney that oversaw the Ghislaine Maxwell trial.
Yeah.
And only victims that had been molested exclusively by Maxwell and Epstein were called to testify. That was a very carefully choreographed trial where everybody was taught what to say and what they shouldn't say. And he also oversaw the grand jury that indicted P. Diddy. And I've talked about grand juries earlier, how easy they are to corrupt. Now, Damian Williams should have indicted Diddy on at least 2 counts of child trafficking. But he did not. And then there were 3, and he was indicted on 3 things. And then there were like 3 superseding indictments. And I have never seen prosecutors work so hard to throw a case in my entire life, man, than what happened with the Diddy case. But
it seemed pretty open and shut. And then next thing you know, he's basically just walking away.
Yeah. And he's looking at 2 counts of the Mann Act at this point, which is 10 years apiece. He's going to get, I predicted early on, on my blog, I've got an article that I wrote. I wrote an article on May 1st of 2024.
Yeah.
In which I said, P. Diddy, the fix is in. So, and at that point, because of Damian Williams' involvement, Damian Williams is a very dirty guy. He came out of the Clinton machine, and he worked for a Clinton bagman, Terry McAuliffe, who was the governor of Maryland. And once I saw that he was involved with P. Diddy, I just knew that the fix was in.
What's the answer to fix our political system? Both sides. I mean, how do we get all of these bad individuals out and kind of restart? Or is that possible?
As I said, if Epstein Justice comes together, there's over 320 million Americans.
Yeah.
If we get 1/3 of 1% of Americans join us, that's 1 million Americans.
Yeah.
And with 1 million Americans marching on Washington, D.C., you can get things changed. So at Epstein Justice, we just need 1/3 of 1% of Americans to come along with us that are appalled like we are, and then we'll see change.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So I know we gotta wrap up, Nick, but let's go through that. Where can we find Epstein Justice, and what can people do to help?
EpsteinJustice.com and sign up, register for one of our webinars, and you'll get emails and we'll walk you through the entire process.
Yeah.
And not only is it horrible that our political system has become so compromised, but I'll give you some numbers that are really abhorrent. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage American girls and 5% of underage American boys are molested. So,
that seems so high.
And the people in the field say that it's slightly conservative for girls and very conservative for boys. But if you just go with the CDC numbers, you've got over 50 million Americans that are molested as minors.
Wow.
And then the Department of Health and Human Services commissioned a study that found that between 240,000 and 325,000 women and children are sexually trafficked in the United States every year. And here's where it gets really appalling. According to the 2023 Federal Human Trafficking Report, only 664 individuals were charged with child trafficking in 2023. So
why is that so low? Is that just what we've been talking about this whole time? It's
yes,
a system full of blackmail and bad.
Well, not only blackmail, but prosecutors don't like those cases.
Yeah,
they're dirty cases, and they're hard to prosecute. So our judiciary, law enforcement, would rather just have 50 million Americans molested and 240,000 to 325,000 trafficked. And then there's millions of hours of child abuse material on the internet, millions. And in 2024, there was 1,375 people convicted for child porn.
Yeah, that's extremely low.
So when we're talking about trafficking or we're talking about child abuse material, we're talking about a fraction of 1%.
Yeah.
Of those people are going to jail, a fraction of 1%. And this is another reason why Epstein is important. We've got millions of abuse victims in the United States. And if we allow the Department of Justice to be unresponsive to victims in the Epstein case, a proven trafficking case,
right,
that sends a message to millions of victims, millions, that they have no voice and no hope for justice. And that's another reason why we need to get something done here.
Yeah, agree. And thank you, Nick, for taking a little bit of time to talk about it. It's such a complicated web, that goes back so far and involves so many people, especially in positions of power. It's difficult for most of us just in the public to keep track of it, and to figure out who's actually at fault. So I appreciate you coming on and kind of lining some of that out and just giving some straight answers with it, so we can kind of all be on the same page. Because if we're on the same page, then maybe we can start to do something about it.
Well, that's what Epstein Justice is about. We got to start getting on the same page. We got to protect our children. We got to change our political system.
Yeah, for sure. Nick, I know I believe your latest book was The Truth About Watergate.
Yes.
Anything you'd like to say about that before we wrap up?
I think it's a good book, but of course I wrote it, so I'm going to think that it's a good book. But at this point, when I give these interviews, I'm not really concerned about books, selling my books. I'm much more concerned about Epstein Justice than I am about selling.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Of course. Nick, where can we find you on social media if we'd like to know more?
My website is nickbryantnyc.com, and I'll give you my links that you can post.
I'll post them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But-
thank you, Nick.
But the most important thing is epsteinjustice.com.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Hold
Okay.
on 1 second, Nick. Author, journalist, Nick Bryant. Epstein Justice is the website. Nick, I think, did a really good job kind of explaining how we got to this point. We started this podcast 6.5 years ago, and our mindset at that time was to completely stay away from the political realm. Well, the last 6 years or so have been pretty eventful, so it's difficult to completely stay out of that realm. We try to have guests on that are advocates for both sides of the political spectrum. I myself tend to lean Democratic. Democrat. I grew up believing I was a Republican. I was a big fan of Ronald Reagan and the first George Bush. But I also liked Bill Clinton and the second George Bush. As I've gotten older, I've been able to see the deficiencies in all of those presidents' policies. There's some good. I still have a fondness for Reagan and the fact that he was able to bring us together as a country, and not too many people have been able to do that. I've got such fond memories of the 1984 Olympics, and it felt like just as a country we were so together. Same thing happened after 9/11. For a brief time, we were all together. It was terrific. However, I think with politics, as you get older, you have to take those blinders off. You can't just loyally follow a party when both parties are full of bad characters, bad actors, people that are, as Nick was saying, are compromised, people that are making decisions based on not wanting to lose their power instead of what's best for the country. It's terrible. So I'll say this. I've been pretty open about my lack of support, let's say, for what Donald Trump is doing. I believe that he is acting as a dictator that is actively doing things to enrich himself and friends. That's my belief. Whatever you believe, and I'll say this. I think the reason we're here is because the Democratic Party has done such a poor job recently advocating for the American people. I believe that. So I'm not happy with either party, but whichever party you support, this should be something that we can agree on. If we have child molesters in the government, or people that are compromised so that other people can influence the decisions they are making, we need those people gone, whichever party they're in. And I don't care who you're supporting. If they're doing something that disgusting, then they need to go. Even if that hurts your political party, we should all be in agreement on that. So I get frustrated when anyone on either side blindly follows their political party when that party does something that is just abhorrent. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's just my opinion. If we're going to change things around, we need to stop worrying about what party somebody belongs to and start worrying about, is this somebody that is actively trying to help the most people or the majority of people in the American political system. I mean, that seems like it would be easy. I get that it's not. Well, and I've always said that politics should be fairly simple. You do what is right and what is best for the most people the majority of the time. That should be your guideline. It should not be to actively find groups that you can take advantage of. And I think as a country, we do that with our young people, with our labor force that is working for way too little money. They cannot survive. Or the youth that we have today can't afford to buy a house. I mean, what are we doing? They can't afford to support themselves. They are out there working full-time jobs, dealing with the public, still have to get government assistance, and still can't make it. So you tell me, what are we doing? Why are we protecting people that don't have our best interests at heart? If you believe that the Democratic Party is doing things that are actively working against us as the American people, I get that. You want to vote against them, I get that. And the same goes for the Republican Party. If you believe that and you're voting against that, I support that. I think that's terrific. I don't have an issue with the Republican Party at its core, at what it's supposed to be, and the same for the Democratic Party. The issue I have is that we've got people in power that we've put in power that are actively working to destroy our democracy. And we shouldn't let that happen. And if that person is also abusing children, what are we doing? Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. I think it's such an important subject. We need to keep the heat on. I agree with Nick. We had seven members vote against releasing this list. Let's get after them. It's ridiculous that we're protecting people that are on their list. If they're on that list, let them answer for it. If that's a Hollywood person, a political person, whoever it is, let them answer for it. It's their fault they're on the list. If you're finding us for the first time, thank you for being here. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. Please subscribe. It really helps us out. Our website's meistercon.com. You can find 1,000 episodes on there, audio and video versions, meistercon.com. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for putting up with my rambling for a few minutes. Till next time. Bye, everybody.